The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Embarcadero Center Tower held the particular silence of people waiting to perform. 3 founders sat on one side of the glass table, laptops open, slide deck queued. On the other side, 5 chairs remained empty at 9:58 a.m. on a Thursday morning in late September. San Francisco fog still pressed against the windows. Marcus Reed stepped off the elevator 2 minutes early, his leather portfolio under one arm, and nodded to the receptionist who barely glanced up. He'd dressed carefully that morning. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie, the kind of studied casual that worked in venture capital circles, where showing up in a hoodie might signal visionary, but showing up too formal suggested you didn't get it. He got it. He'd been getting it for 23 years. The receptionist's phone console lit up. She lifted the receiver, listened, then pointed down the hallway without looking at Marcus. "Conference room C, they're expecting the Palladian team." "Thank you," Marcus said, already moving. His footsteps made no sound on the polished concrete floors. The walls displayed oversized prints of the city's skyline at various times of day, the kind of generic corporate art that cost more than it should. He'd been in enough of these buildings to recognize the species. Newly renovated, designed to impress visiting founders, probably leased by a firm that had raised their 3rd fund and needed to project permanence. Inside Conference Room C, the 3 founders looked up when he entered. The youngest, maybe 27, wore a Patagonia vest over a company t-shirt with a logo Marcus didn't recognize. The woman in the middle, older, mid-30s, had her dark hair pulled back severely, laptop screen reflecting off her glasses. The third, another man, late 20s, sat back in his chair with the loose confidence of someone who'd been told he had good ideas his entire life. None of them stood. The youngest raised a hand in a half-wave. "Hey, we're Nextensor. You with Palladian?" Marcus set his portfolio on the table, pulling out the chair directly across from them. Marcus Reed. He left it at that, settling into the seat, opening the portfolio to reveal a leather notepad, a single pen. He'd learned long ago that saying less up front sometimes revealed more about the room. "Cool, cool." The youngest looked toward the door. "Are the others coming? We had Palladian down for a 10 o'clock with." He glanced at his screen. 4 attendees. "I'm often early," Marcus said. His tone stayed neutral, pleasant. "Tell me about Nextensor while we wait." The woman in the middle exchanged a glance with the man on her right. "We usually do the full pitch once everyone's here. Are you taking notes for the partners?" Something shifted in Marcus's chest, subtle as the elevator cables settling. He'd felt this shift before. It arrived in conference rooms at networking events in the moments when people looked at him and made calculations they weren't aware they were making. "I take my own notes," he said. "Walk me through the deck." The man on the right leaned forward, taking charge. "Sure, we can do a quick overview. I'm Kevin Strand, CEO. This is Jennifer Yao, our CTO, and Brad McKenzie, Head of Product." He clicked a button, and the screen on the wall flickered to life. Big sans-serif letters, Nextensor. Below that, revolutionizing enterprise data infrastructure through quantum-ready architecture. "We're building the next generation of data pipeline solutions for companies that need to process massive streams in real time while maintaining perfect data integrity." Marcus wrote a single word in his notepad. Quantum. He underlined it once. "How far along are you on the quantum integration?" Brad spoke up. "It's more quantum-ready, meaning our architecture is designed to scale into quantum computing as that becomes commercially viable. Right now we're running on classical infrastructure, but the hooks are there. So it's not a quantum company," Marcus said, still writing. "It's positioned for quantum," Kevin corrected, an edge entering his voice. "Look, maybe we should wait for the partners. This is pretty technical." The door opened. A young woman in her mid-20s stepped in, wearing jeans and a blazer, carrying a cardboard tray with coffee cups. Sorry, Raj is right behind me." He stopped to take a call. She set the tray down, distributing cups. "I'm Annie Chen, associate at Palladian." She looked at Marcus with polite confusion. "Are you with Nextensor?" "Marcus Reed." He accepted the coffee she offered, black, still hot. "Oh." Annie's expression flickered, something uncertain crossing it. "I don't think I have you on the invite list." "I was copied on the calendar hold," Marcus said. "Michael sent it over last week. If you're finding this story valuable, the kind of thing that needs to be shared and remembered, help it reach others who should hear it." Annie pulled out her phone, scrolling. Michael Brennan. He's actually not on this meeting. He's on the West Coast team, and this is an East Coast deal flow, but maybe there was a cross-forward. She looked up, smiling apologetically. Either way, great to have you. Do you work with Michael? Marcus took a sip of coffee. It was mediocre, burned. We've worked together, yes. Another man entered, older than Annie, maybe 40, with expensive glasses and a blue Oxford shirt. Sorry, team, that was our LP in Singapore, couldn't drop the call. This was Raj Mehta, one of the partners whose name appeared on the Palladian website. He shook hands with the founders, efficient and warm, then turned to Marcus with professional courtesy. Raj Mehta, Marcus Reed. Are you consulting with Nextensa? They didn't mention bringing in outside counsel. Kevin jumped in. No, he said he's with Palladian, or he was copied on the meeting. Raj's face showed careful neutrality. I don't think we've met, Marcus. Are you in the San Francisco office? New York, Marcus said. I was in town. Michael thought I should sit in. Huh. Raj pulled out his phone, tapping quickly. Annie, did Michael give you a heads up? Annie shook her head, still looking at her screen. I'm not seeing any forwards from him. The air in the room had changed. The founders watched this exchange with growing interest. Jennifer, the CTO, had closed her laptop slightly, as if the pitch had become secondary to the unfolding confusion. Marcus could see the shape of what was happening, the familiar architecture of the moment. He set his coffee down carefully, the cup making a precise click against the glass table. Kevin leaned back in his chair, addressing Raj. Should we reschedule? If there's some internal coordination issue... No. Raj sat down, forcing a smile. Let's proceed. Marcus, you're welcome to stay. We'll sort out the calendar confusion afterward. I want to hear what you've built. He gestured to Kevin. Please take us through it. The pitch resumed. Kevin advanced through slides with practiced rhythm, talking about market size, competitive landscape, the technical moat Nextensa had built. Jennifer added details about their engineering team, the patents pending, the architecture decisions that made them scalable. Brad discussed customer acquisition, the 3 pilots they had running, the conversion funnel. It was a solid pitch. Marcus had seen hundreds like it. Strong technical team, decent traction, believable but not revolutionary. The kind of company that could return 3 to 5 times in a good outcome, disappear entirely in a bad one. Throughout the presentation, Kevin and Jennifer directed their eye contact almost exclusively to Raj. When Annie asked a question about burn rate, they answered her, but their bodies stayed angled toward the senior partner. Marcus took notes steadily, writing down specific technical claims, customer names, financial projections. Twice he raised his hand slightly, trying to ask a question. The first time, Kevin was mid-sentence and didn't pause. The second time, Jennifer saw him, but Kevin launched into the next slide before Marcus could speak. Raj asked about the competitive landscape. You mentioned 3 other companies in this space. Walk me through why you win. Kevin's answer was detailed, confident. He talked about their superior data handling, their more flexible pricing model, the fact that they'd focused on financial services while the competitors went broad. We're the only ones who really understand the compliance requirements in banking and trading. That's our wedge. Marcus cleared his throat. Have you spoken to any CIOs in the top 20 banks? The question hung in the air. Kevin looked at him for the first time with direct focus. We're in conversations. Which banks? We're still under NDA for most of those discussions. Marcus wrote, no Tier 1 pilots. He looked up. And your patent claims, the 3 you mentioned. Are those filed or granted? Jennifer answered, a note of defensiveness creeping in. Filed, which is standard for a company at our stage. The patent process takes years. Of course. Marcus made another note. What are the claims specifically? Data compression, pipeline architecture, or the query optimization? Brad cut in. Maybe we should focus on the business model. The technical deep dive is probably more appropriate for due diligence if Palladian decides to proceed. Raj nodded. That's fair. Let's talk about the round. You're raising a 12 million Series A at a 60 million pre-money valuation. Talk to me about how you arrived at that number. Kevin walked through the logic. Comparable companies, their traction relative to those comparables, the amount of runway they needed to hit the next milestone. It was the standard calculus. Marcus listened, watching the way Raj leaned forward, engaged, while Annie typed notes rapidly on her laptop. The founders had relaxed into the pitch again. their rhythm restored now that the questions came from the expected source. 40 minutes in, Kevin reached the closing slide. "We're looking to close this round in the next 6 weeks. We have strong interest from 2 other firms and 1 corporate venture arm. Palladian was recommended to us by one of your portfolio companies, Data Bridge, who we've partnered with on a reseller agreement." He let that sit, the implied social proof. Raj smiled. "Martin's a good friend. He didn't mention you were raising." "We just started the process 2 weeks ago," Jennifer said. "Pretty tight timeline." "Who else is in the mix?" Raj asked. "If you're comfortable sharing." Kevin named 2 firms, both mid-tier, respectable but not top-tier. Then he said, "And we're talking to Meridian Capital. They've been pretty aggressive on terms." Marcus felt that name land differently. Meridian was a major player, multi-billion-dollar funds, portfolio companies that had gone public, the kind of firm that made founders dream of credibility and follow-on funding. But Meridian was also careful. They didn't get aggressive on terms without serious conviction. He wrote the name in his notepad, circled it. Annie asked about the existing cap table. Kevin walked through it. Founders held 60% combined. A small angel round had taken 10%. Another 5 had gone to early employees. The remaining 25% was reserved for this institutional round. Clean structure, no obvious complications. Raj glanced at his watch. "This is great. Really solid. We'll need to dig into the technical architecture more deeply, and Annie will want to see the full financials monthly breakdown." "Can you get those over today?" "Absolutely," Kevin said. "We'll send everything this afternoon." "Perfect." Raj stood, extending his hand. Kevin, Jennifer, and Brad stood as well, shaking hands with Raj, and then Annie. Raj moved toward the door, already pulling his phone out. Annie gathered her laptop and the empty coffee cups. The founders began packing their own equipment, the post-pitch energy filling the room, a mix of relief and hope. Marcus remained seated. He clicked his pen once, looking at his notes. Then he looked up at Kevin. "One more question." Kevin paused, laptop half closed. "Sure. Your customer lifetime value calculation. You're projecting 36 months average retention at 95,000 annual contract value. But earlier you said your longest pilot is 4 months. How did you model the retention curve?" The room went quiet. Kevin looked at Jennifer. Jennifer looked at the table. Brad spoke up. "It's based on industry benchmarks for infrastructure software." "Which benchmarks?" Marcus kept his tone even, curious rather than confrontational. "I mean, that's pretty standard for enterprise SaaS," Brad said. "You see 3-year contracts all the time once you're past the pilot phase." Marcus nodded slowly. "You might, but your churn assumptions drive your valuation model. If retention is lower, your unit economics change significantly." He tapped his pen against the notepad. "Might be worth having a few scenarios in your model. Conservative case, base case, optimistic case." Jennifer's expression hardened. "We've been pretty rigorous with our projections." "I'm sure you have." Marcus closed his portfolio, standing now. "Thanks for the presentation." Raj had already left the room. Annie hovered near the door, clearly uncertain. Kevin extended a hand toward Marcus. Professional, but perfunctory. "Thanks for your time." "Good luck with the raise," Marcus said. He shook hands with each founder, noting the brief firm grip, the quick release. They were already thinking past him, toward the firms that mattered. Out in the hallway, Annie caught up with him. "Hey, I'm sorry for the confusion earlier. Let me check with Michael about how you got looped in." "No need," Marcus said. "I'll follow up with him directly." "Do you have a card?" Annie asked. "Just so I have your contact info in our system." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a simple business card. Heavy stock, minimalist design. His name, a phone number, an email address. No company name, no title. Annie took it, glancing down, then looking back up at him with a polite smile. "Great. We'll probably do a deeper dive next week if the partners are interested." "Are you usually in these early screenings?" "Sometimes," Marcus said. He walked toward the elevator. Behind him he heard Annie's footsteps returning to the conference room, heard the low murmur of voices as she rejoined the conversation. The elevator arrived quickly. He stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the doors close on the 42nd floor. The descent was smooth. Marcus looked at his reflection in the polished steel doors, 51 years old, hair graying at the temples in a way people called distinguished. The suit he wore had cost $1,800, tailored in New York. He'd made his first $1 million before he turned 30. His second fund had returned 7 times the invested capital. The fund he managed now, Apex Ventures, had $2 billion under management and a portfolio of 37 companies, 12 of which had exited successfully, 5 of which were unicorns. His name appeared on the Forbes Midas list, not at the top, but high enough to matter. He sat on 4 boards, advised 3 more, and had turned down a partnership at one of the most prestigious firms in Silicon Valley because he preferred to build something himself. None of that information had been in the room on the 42nd floor. He'd walked in as just another person, and that was enough to render him invisible. The elevator reached the lobby. Marcus stepped out into the bright morning. Fog burned off now, sunlight hard on the glass and steel. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a contact. The call connected after 2 rings. "Marcus." Michael Brennan's voice came through warm, distracted. "How'd it go?" "Interesting," Marcus said. He started walking toward Market Street, the financial district bustling with the mid-morning rush. "Tell me about Nextensor. They're solid, right? I met Kevin at a conference last month. Smart guy, good technical chops. I forwarded you the deck because I thought there might be a strategic fit for Apex. Did you tell Raj I'd be there?" A pause on the line. "I figured you'd coordinate directly. Why, was there an issue?" Marcus let the question sit. A bus rumbled past, diesel smell mixing with coffee from a nearby cart. "No issue, I'll send you my notes." "Appreciate it, man. Hey, we should grab dinner tonight if you're still in town. There's a place in Hayes Valley I want to try." "I'm flying back this afternoon," Marcus said. "Next time." He ended the call, kept walking. His hotel was 6 blocks away. He had 3 hours before his flight, enough time to write up his assessment, send it to his team, and make a few other calls. He'd learned patience over 2 decades in venture capital, learned to watch how rooms worked, how information flowed, who got heard and who got ignored. He'd learned that being right wasn't enough. Being rich wasn't enough. Being successful by every measurable standard wasn't enough. You also had to be seen, and that visibility was its own currency, one that didn't trade at the same exchange rate for everyone. Back in Conference Room C, the founders gathered their equipment with the satisfied exhaustion of people who believed they'd performed well. Kevin zipped his laptop into its bag, glancing at Jennifer. That was solid. Raj seemed engaged. "Yeah," Jennifer agreed. "I think we're in good shape with them." "Did you get the vibe that they're competitive with Meridian?" Brad stacked papers into a folder. "Palladian's got a good reputation, but they're smaller. If Meridian comes in with a strong term sheet, that's probably the move." Annie reappeared in the doorway. "Hey guys, great pitch. Raj wants me to get the financials from you today so we can model it out over the weekend. We'll send everything by 3, Kevin promised. He hefted his bag over his shoulder. "Question for you. The guy who was sitting in, Marcus, what's his role?" Annie shrugged. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I need to check with Michael. He might be a consultant or maybe an advisor to one of our LPs." "Why?" "Just curious," Kevin said. "He asked some pretty detailed questions." "He seemed kind of, I don't know, intense," Brad added, "like he was testing us." Annie laughed lightly. "Everyone tests you in this business. That's the game." Jennifer closed her laptop with a decisive click. "Well, we passed." The founders left the building, emerging onto the same sidewalk Marcus had walked 20 minutes earlier. They headed toward a coffee shop 2 blocks away, already talking about the next pitch, the one scheduled for tomorrow morning with a firm in Menlo Park. The September sun warmed the concrete. Somewhere in the city, capital flowed through fiber-optic cables. Decisions got made in conference rooms. Companies lived and died in the space between a yes and a no. Marcus reached his hotel room, a clean, efficient space on the 23rd floor with a view of the bay. He set his portfolio on the desk, opened his laptop, and began to type. The assessment took him 30 minutes. He documented the pitch, the technical claims, the financial projections, the questions he'd asked and the answers he'd received. He noted the absence of Tier 1 banking pilots, the patent status, the modeling assumptions on retention. He wrote 2 paragraphs about team dynamics, the way they presented together, the balance of roles. Then he wrote a final paragraph, clinical and direct. Pass. The valuation was aggressive for the traction level. The competitive landscape was more crowded than they acknowledged. The Meridian interest was likely exaggerated. He attached the assessment to an email, copying his 3 investment partners at Apex. Subject line, Nextensor pitch notes. He hit send, closed the laptop and sat back in the chair. Through the window, the bay spread out toward Oakland, water glinting. Boats moved across the surface, slow and purposeful. His phone buzzed. A text from one of his partners, David Zhang. "Saw your notes. Sounds like a pass. You still on for the Monday IC?" Marcus typed back. "Yes. See you then." He had 2 hours before his car arrived for the airport. He could have used the time to return other emails, review another deck, make investor calls. Instead, he sat with the quiet, feeling the particular weight of the morning settle. It wasn't anger he felt. Anger would have been simpler, cleaner. What he felt was older than anger, more familiar. It was the recognition that even at this level, even with every credential and every success, there were still rooms where he'd have to prove he belonged, where his presence generated confusion before respect, where the automatic assumption was that he was something other than what he was. He thought about Kevin and Jennifer and Brad, 3 smart, capable people building something that might succeed or might not, and how they'd looked past him the entire morning. Not with hostility, with indifference, with the subtle certainty that the real conversation would happen with the people who looked like them, talked like them, fit the template they'd been taught to recognize as power. Marcus stood, picked up his phone, and made another call. This one connected to a direct line in New York, his chief of staff. "Sarah, I need you to pull something for me." "Go ahead," Sarah Chen said. She'd worked with Marcus for 6 years, efficient and unflappable. "Company called Nextensor raising a Series A. Find out if they're really talking to Meridian Capital. If they are, find out who the partner is." "On it. Anything else?" "Check if we have any connections to their customer pilots. They mentioned DataBridge as a partner. We don't have a position in DataBridge, but I think David knows their CEO. I'll loop David in," Sarah said. "Should I flag this for Monday's IC?" "No, just background." Marcus heard keyboard clicks on her end. "Thanks, Sarah. Travel safe." He ended the call, gathered his few belongings. The rest of the day unspooled predictably. Car to SFO, security line, the strange compressed time of airport terminals. His flight departed on schedule. He sat in first class, seat 2A, declined the pre-departure beverage, and opened his laptop as the plane taxied. Other emails demanded attention. A portfolio company was negotiating an acquisition. Another needed bridge financing. A third wanted to hire a new CFO and needed Marcus's approval. This was the actual work of venture capital, the steady management of investments already made, the cultivation of relationships that might yield returns years into the future. But his mind kept circling back to the morning, to the moment when Annie had looked at him with polite confusion and asked if he was with Nextensor, to Kevin's suggestion that they wait for the partners before discussing technical details, to the way the entire pitch had flowed around him as if he were incidental, a courtesy attendee, someone who could be safely ignored. The plane reached cruising altitude. Marcus ordered coffee, black. The flight attendant, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes, set the cup down carefully. "Long day." "Getting there," Marcus said. "I hear that." She moved on to the next row. Marcus sipped the coffee, better than the conference room offering, and looked out at the landscape below, California's Central Valley, spreading out in geometric patterns, agriculture and industry carved into the earth. He'd flown this route dozens of times. The view never changed much. What changed was his perspective on it, the accumulation of experiences that shifted how he read the terrain. His phone buzzed, airplane Wi-Fi kicking in. An email from Sarah. Confirmed. Meridian is in conversations with Nextensor. Partner is Christina Walsh. She invested in 2 of their competitors last year, so the interest is credible, but probably exploratory. DataBridge, David knows the CEO, says they signed a basic reseller agreement with Nextensor last quarter, but no meaningful revenue yet. Want me to dig deeper? Marcus typed back. No. Sufficient. He sent the message, then opened a new email. This one went to Michael Brennan at Palladian. The tone stayed collegial but clear. "Michael, thanks for the intro to Nextensor. Sat in on their pitch this morning. Solid team, but I'm going to pass for Apex. Valuation feels aggressive and the market's getting crowded. One note, your team seemed surprised I was there. Might want to tighten up internal coordination on meeting invites. All best, Marcus." He hit send before he could second-guess the wording. The message was diplomatic enough. It gave Michael a gentle heads-up, without making it a confrontation. Whether Michael would understand the subtext, whether he'd talk to Raj about what had happened in that conference room, was another question. Marcus had learned that sometimes these conversations resolved themselves, other times they festered. Either way, he'd planted the seed. The flight landed at JFK 3 minutes early. Marcus took a car service into Manhattan, the late afternoon traffic heavy on the Long Island Expressway. By the time he reached his apartment on the Upper West Side, evening had settled, the city lighting up against the September dusk. He lived alone, had for 3 years since his divorce. The apartment was large, carefully furnished, full of books and art he'd collected over decades. It felt both like home and like a museum of his own life, evidence of success that sometimes seemed distant from the person who'd achieved it. He made dinner, a simple pasta with vegetables, ate standing at the kitchen counter while scrolling through news on his tablet. The venture capital world operated on gossip and information flow, and he'd trained himself to stay current. A company he'd passed on 2 years ago had just announced a $100 million Series C. Another portfolio company of Apex had made a key hire, their new VP of sales poached from Google. The ecosystem churned, capital reallocating constantly, winners and losers emerging from the churn. His phone rang. David Zhang, calling from his home in Brooklyn. Marcus answered. "Hey, got your email about Nextensor," David said. "Smart pass. I looked at the deck after you sent your notes. The unit economics don't work if churn is even 5 points higher than they're modeling." That was my read too. "Sarah mentioned you were asking about Meridian's involvement. You thinking there's a story there?" Marcus rinsed his plate, setting it in the sink. "Just due diligence. If Christina Walsh is really interested, they must be seeing something we're not." "Or," David said, "she's being aggressive because she missed their competitors and needs a position in the space. You know how that goes." "Yeah?" Marcus dried his hands on a towel. "I know how that goes." They talked for a few more minutes about Monday's investment committee meeting, about a potential follow-on round for one of their best-performing companies. David had been with Apex since the beginning, Marcus's first partner hire, and they developed the kind of shorthand that came from shared wins and losses. Before hanging up, David said, "Hey, everything okay? You sound off." Marcus looked out his window at the city lights. "Just tired. Long day. Get some rest. See you Monday." The call ended. Marcus stood in his quiet apartment, the ambient noise of the city muffled by expensive windows. He thought about calling his daughter, who was in her second year at Yale, but it was late and she'd be studying. He thought about pouring a drink, then decided against it. Instead, he went to his office, a small room lined with bookshelves, and pulled down a binder from the top shelf. Inside were annual reports from Apex Ventures, glossy documents sent to their limited partners every year. He paged through the most recent one, looking at the portfolio companies, the returns, the narrative arc of growth and success. On page 12, there was a photo of the Apex team. Marcus in the center, David to his left, their other 2 partners, Jennifer Okafor and Tom Steinberg, flanking them. Below the photo, a paragraph described their investment philosophy, their focus on enterprise software and financial technology, their commitment to backing exceptional founders. It was all true. It was also marketing, the story Apex told about itself to attract capital and deal flow. Marcus closed the binder, slid it back onto the shelf. He wondered what story Nextensor would tell about their fundraising journey, whether they'd remember the pitch at Palladian as a success or a near miss, whether they'd remember the man who'd sat across from them asking uncomfortable questions, or whether he'd already faded from their narrative, a footnote if that. The weekend passed in a blur of routine. He went to the gym Saturday morning, worked out with his trainer, a former college athlete who pushed him through circuits that left him breathing hard. He had lunch with an old friend from business school, someone who'd gone into private equity instead of venture capital, and now managed a multi-billion-dollar fund focused on infrastructure. They talked about interest rates, about the public markets, about whether the venture ecosystem was in for a correction. His friend asked about Apex's performance. Marcus gave the standard answer. Strong portfolio, good exit momentum, raising the next fund in 18 months. Sunday he spent reading, catching up on industry reports and company updates. One of his portfolio companies, a fintech platform called Equitable Finance, had hit a major milestone, processing $1 billion in transactions in a single month. The founder, a brilliant woman named Keisha Thomas who'd built the company from nothing, sent him a celebratory email. Marcus wrote back immediately, congratulating her and her team, asking when she wanted to schedule the next board meeting. These were the moments that made the work worthwhile, seeing founders he believed in succeed, watching companies grow from ideas into institutions. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Marcus dressed in a charcoal suit and walked to the Apex offices in Midtown. A 35-minute walk he took whenever weather permitted. The offices occupied the 17th floor of a newer building, open floor plan with glass-walled conference rooms and a kitchen stocked with expensive coffee and fresh fruit. The team had grown to 20 people, the 4 partners, a dozen associates and analysts, support staff. It was still small compared to the mega funds, but large enough to have real weight in the market. The investment committee meeting started at 9. The 4 partners gathered in the main conference room, laptops open, reviewing the 3 deals on the agenda. Tom Steinberg led the first discussion, a Series B opportunity in a logistics software company. Jennifer Okafor presented the second, an AI-powered legal research platform. Both pitches were thorough, data-heavy, full of the questions any rigorous investor would ask. The conversation flowed easily, challenges and pushbacks balanced with enthusiasm. They passed on the logistics company, the margin structure too thin. They voted to proceed with diligence on the legal platform, Jennifer leading the process. The third item on the agenda was a portfolio review. David walked through the numbers, company by company, tracking progress against plan. Most were performing well. 2 were struggling, burn rates too high relative to revenue growth. One, a cybersecurity firm called SecureNet, was in serious trouble, the CEO having made a series of bad hires that had poisoned the culture. "We need to have a conversation with Daniel," Marcus said, referring to SecureNet's founder. "This is solvable, but he's going to need to make some hard calls." "I'll set it up for this week," David said. "He knows it's coming." Jennifer leaned back in her chair. "Are we thinking replacement CEO or can Daniel turn it around?" "Too early to make that call," Marcus said, "but it's on the table." The meeting wrapped at 11. Marcus returned to his office, a corner space with a view south toward downtown. His assistant brought him coffee, along with a printed calendar of the week's commitments. He had back-to-back meetings through Wednesday, a board meeting on Thursday, a speaking engagement Friday at a conference for emerging managers. The rhythm of the work was relentless but predictable. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Hi Marcus, this is Annie Chen from Palladian. Do you have a few minutes for a call?" He stared at the message. It had been 4 days since the next Tensor pitch. He'd expected the inquiry, but not quite this soon. He typed back, "Can do 2 p.m. today if that works." The response came quickly. "Perfect. I'll call you then. Thanks." Marcus set his phone down, looked out at the city. The morning's investment committee meeting had been routine, professional, the kind of thing that happened every Monday. But this call would be different. He could feel it in the careful phrasing of Annie's text, the speed of her response. Something had shifted. At 2 o'clock his phone rang. He answered on the second ring. "Marcus Reed." "Hi Marcus, it's Annie Chen. Thanks for making time." Her voice was professional, but he detected an edge of nervousness. "I wanted to follow up on the next Tensor meeting last week." "Sure," Marcus said. He kept his tone neutral. "So I talked to Michael Brennan after you left. He confirmed he'd forwarded you the meeting invite. Thought you might be interested from an Apex perspective. I'm sorry there was confusion on our end about your attendance." "No problem," Marcus said. "These things happen." A pause. Annie seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "I also wanted to let you know that Raj and I discussed the pitch. We thought Next Tensor presented well, but when we dug into the financials over the weekend, some of your questions really resonated. The retention modeling, the lack of Tier 1 pilots, we're probably going to pass." "Makes sense," Marcus said. "It's a crowded market." "Right." Another pause. "I guess I'm also calling because, well, I looked you up after the meeting. I didn't realize you were the Marcus Reed, as in Apex Ventures. I feel like an idiot for not recognizing you." There it was, the recognition arriving late after the moment when it would have mattered. Marcus felt a familiar tiredness settle over him. "Don't worry about it. I wasn't wearing a name tag." "Still," Annie said, and now she sounded genuinely embarrassed, "we should have done better. Raj wanted me to reach out and apologize for any confusion, and also to say, if Apex is looking at similar deals in this space, we'd love to co-invest. We have a good relationship with Michael, and obviously we respect your track record." "I appreciate that," Marcus said. He let the silence stretch out, giving her room to continue. "Anyway, I just wanted to clear the air. And if you're ever looking at deals where a partnership makes sense, please keep us in mind." "I will," Marcus said. "Thanks for calling, Annie." They exchanged a few more pleasantries and ended the call. Marcus set his phone on his desk and swiveled his chair to look out the window. The apology had been sincere enough, wrapped in the professional language of venture capital deal flow and partnerships. But it had come only after Annie had Googled him, only after she'd realized that the man sitting quietly in the conference room controlled a $2 billion fund and had a track record that rivaled anyone's in the ecosystem. He wondered if Raj had put her up to the call, whether they'd discussed among themselves how the pitch had gone down, whether anyone had said aloud what Marcus had experienced in real time, the way they'd talked past him, the assumptions they'd made, the casual dismissal of his questions. Probably not. More likely they'd framed it as a coordination error, a mix-up that could have been avoided with better internal communication. His door opened. Sarah Chen stuck her head in. "You have 5 minutes before your 2:30. "Thanks." Marcus stood, straightened his tie, grabbed his portfolio. The afternoon unspooled into meetings with founders, calls with portfolio companies, the steady work of managing capital and relationships. By the time he left the office at 7, the sky had gone dark, the city in full evening mode. On the subway ride uptown, he checked his email. One message caught his attention. Sender name, Kevin Strand. Subject line, following up. Marcus opened it, reading as the train rattled through the tunnel. "Hi Marcus, hope this finds you well. I wanted to reach out after our pitch at Palladian last week. We appreciated your questions and your time. I'm following up because we're now in final conversations with our lead investor and are filling out the rest of the round. Based on your questions, it seemed like you had some real interest in our space. Would Apex be open to participating as a follow-on investor? We're holding a small allocation for strategic partners. Let me know if you'd like to reconnect. Best, Kevin." Marcus read the email twice. The tone was friendly, professional. The ask clearly stated. Kevin had done what any good founder would do, following up with everyone who'd been in the room, trying to close the round. There was no indication that Kevin understood what had actually happened during that pitch, no acknowledgement of the dynamic that had played out. He drafted a response, keeping it brief. "Kevin, thanks for reaching out. After reviewing your materials and digging into the market, I'm going to pass for Apex. The space is competitive and I'm not convinced the unit economics work at your current price point. Wish you luck with the raise. Best, Marcus." He read it over, then deleted the last sentence. Added instead, "I'd encourage you to pressure test your retention assumptions with some additional customer data. That's where your model is most vulnerable." He hit send. The train reached his stop. Marcus climbed the stairs to street level, the cold air hitting him as he emerged. He walked the 3 blocks to his building, nodding to the doorman, taking the elevator to the 14th floor. Inside his apartment, he poured a glass of whiskey, neat, and sat in the living room with the lights off, the city glow filtering through the windows. His phone buzzed. A reply from Kevin, fast enough that he must have been monitoring his email. "Appreciate the feedback, Marcus. We'll definitely run those scenarios. If you change your mind, offer stands." Marcus didn't respond. He sipped the whiskey, felt the burn, and thought about the distance between how the world saw him and how it treated him. He'd built Apex from nothing, raised fund after fund, proven his judgment again and again. He sat on the boards of major companies. His opinion moved markets in certain circles, and yet he could still walk into a conference room and be treated like a spectator, someone who didn't merit the same attention, the same respect, the same automatic assumption of competence and authority. The thing that made it complicated, the thing that made it hard to articulate even to himself, was that none of it had been overt. Kevin hadn't said anything racist. Jennifer hadn't been hostile. Brad and Raj and Annie had all been professionally polite. The bias lived in the spaces between words, in the eye contact that didn't come, in the questions that got redirected, in the assumptions that placed him outside the circle of people who mattered. He finished his whiskey and went to bed, the city noise a low hum through the walls. Sleep came slowly. When it did, he dreamed about conference rooms and pitches, about sitting at tables where people talked past him, their voices echoing in spaces too large to fill. The rest of the week proceeded normally. Marcus had his board meeting with SecureNet on Thursday, a difficult 3-hour session where he and the other board members walked Daniel through the changes that needed to happen. Daniel took it hard, but took it, promising to move quickly on the personnel issues. Friday's speaking engagement went well. A room full of aspiring venture capitalists asking questions about sourcing deals and managing portfolios. Marcus gave the standard answers, the ones that were true but incomplete, the public-facing narrative of his career. Saturday morning, his daughter called. "Hey, Dad, you free to talk?" "Always," Marcus said. He was in his kitchen making coffee, the morning light pale through the windows. "How's school?" "Intense," Jasmine said. She was 20, studying economics and computer science, brilliant and driven in ways that both thrilled and worried him. "I'm working on this project about bias in machine learning systems, and I wanted to get your take on something." "Go ahead." She launched into an explanation, technical and detailed, about how training data reflected historical prejudices and how those prejudices got encoded into algorithms. Marcus listened, asking clarifying questions, impressed as always by how she thought through problems. At some point she pivoted, saying, "Actually, this connects to something else. Have you ever been in a situation where people didn't take you seriously because you're black, even though you have all the credentials?" The question landed with unexpected force. Marcus set his coffee cup down. "Why do you ask?" "I had this thing happen in one of my classes," Jasmine said. "We were doing group presentations and I kept trying to contribute ideas, but the rest of my group, they just, I don't know, they'd kind of talk over me or act like my suggestions weren't worth discussing. And it wasn't like hostile, it was just, they didn't see me as someone who had valuable input." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "What did you do?" "I eventually just made my own version of the project and presented it separately. The professor liked it better than the group version." Jasmine paused. "But it made me think about your career. You're in venture capital, which is like super white and male. Do you deal with that kind of stuff?" He thought about the conference room at Palladian, about Kevin and Jennifer and Brad looking past him. He thought about 1,000 other moments across 23 years, some subtle, some less so. "Sometimes," he said carefully. "It's part of the landscape." "That's such a diplomatic answer, Dad." Marcus smiled, despite himself. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me if it gets easier. If at some point you have enough success that people just respect you automatically." He considered lying, giving her the reassuring answer. Instead, he said, "It gets different. You have more power, more leverage, but you don't stop having to prove yourself. You just get better at choosing when and how to engage." "That's depressing." "It's realistic," Marcus said. "But here's the other part. You still build things. You still win. You just have to be smarter about it, more strategic. And you surround yourself with people who see you clearly." They talked for another 20 minutes, ranging over school and her plans for winter break and whether she'd come home for Thanksgiving. After they hung up, Marcus sat with his cold coffee, thinking about his daughter navigating spaces that wouldn't automatically make room for her, spaces she'd have to create through force of will and competence. He wanted to protect her from that reality. He also knew he couldn't. Monday arrived with new deals and old problems. Apex's investment committee reviewed 2 opportunities, advancing one to due diligence and passing on the other. Marcus spent Tuesday in back-to-back calls with portfolio companies. Wednesday, he flew to Boston for a meeting with a potential limited partner, a university endowment considering an investment in Apex's next fund. The meeting went well. The endowment's CIO impressed by the track record and the diversity of the team, though Marcus noted how much emphasis got placed on the diversity angle, as if having partners who weren't all white men was itself a differentiator rather than baseline rationality. He returned to New York Wednesday night, tired and ready for the week to end. Instead, he found an email waiting from Michael Brennan, sent late that afternoon. Subject line, "Quick check-in. Marcus, hope you're well. I wanted to circle back on the Nextensa situation. Annie mentioned she called you last week to apologize for the confusion. I also wanted to reach out personally. I realize in retrospect that I should have given Raj a heads up that you'd be attending. That was an oversight on my part, and I'm sorry it created an awkward dynamic. I have enormous respect for you and for Apex, and I hope we can partner on deals down the road. Would love to grab that dinner next time you're out west. Best, Michael." Marcus read the email twice. It was more substantive than Annie's apology, more direct in acknowledging that something had gone wrong, but it still framed the problem as a coordination issue rather than what it actually was. He drafted a reply, then deleted it, drafted another, more pointed, then deleted that too. Finally he wrote, "Michael, appreciate you reaching out. I understand these things happen. Let's definitely grab dinner next time I'm in SF. All best, Marcus." He hit send, closed his laptop, and poured himself another whiskey. The truth was, he could have written a different email. He could have laid out exactly what had happened in that conference room, could have named the bias that had operated just below the surface, could have asked Michael and Raj and Annie to sit with their own discomfort, but he'd learned over 2 decades that there were costs to making those confrontations. You got labeled difficult, oversensitive, someone who played the race card. You burned bridges that might have been useful later, and most importantly, you rarely changed anyone's mind. People nodded and apologized and promised to do better, and then the same dynamics played out the next time because the problem wasn't individual bad actors, it was the water everyone swam in. So he wrote the diplomatic email and moved on, because moving on was how you survived and succeeded in spaces that weren't built for you. Thursday morning brought news that shifted everything. Marcus was in a meeting with David Zhang, reviewing Q3 portfolio performance, when Sarah knocked and entered without waiting. "Sorry to interrupt. Something you need to see." She handed Marcus her iPad, open to a tech news site. The headline read, "Nextensor announces 12 Omitaru Series A led by Meridian Capital." Below it, a photo of Kevin, Jennifer and Brad standing with Christina Walsh, Meridian's partner, all of them smiling in front of a banner with both companies' logos. The article was dated that morning. Marcus scanned the text, and Nextensor, a data infrastructure startup focused on enterprise customers, today announced the close of a $12 million Series A round led by Meridian Capital, with participation from Gradient Ventures and Soma Capital. The company plans to use the funds to expand its engineering team and accelerate customer acquisition in the financial services vertical. "We're thrilled to partner with Christina and the Meridian team," said Kevin Strand, Nextensor's CEO. "Their deep expertise in infrastructure software and their portfolio of category-defining companies make them the ideal partner as we scale." David looked over Marcus's shoulder, reading. "Well, they got their round done. Guess Christina saw something we didn't. Or she's making a bet on the space and they were available at a reasonable price," Marcus said. He handed the iPad back to Sarah. "Thanks for flagging." After Sarah left, David said, "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not." Marcus pulled up his notes from the Nextensor pitch, scanning them. They had momentum and decent traction. Whether they succeed long-term is a different question, but they were fundable. "Palladian passed too, right?" David asked. "Yeah. So we were aligned with them." David closed his laptop. "Not every deal is our deal. You taught me that." Marcus nodded. It was true. They passed on companies all the time that went on to raise successfully, even to succeed. The venture capital model didn't require you to catch every winner, just enough winners to generate the returns your LPs expected. Nextensor might be one of those companies Apex regretted passing on, or it might flame out in 2 years. The data wouldn't be clear for a long time. What nagged at him, though, had nothing to do with the investment decision itself. It was the way the entire interaction had unfolded, the pattern of assumptions and dismissals that had shaped the room even before the pitch began. If he'd been introduced properly, if Raj had known he was coming, if Annie had recognized his name, the pitch would have gone differently. Kevin and Jennifer and Brad would have directed their attention differently. They would have answered his questions with more care. Not because his questions would have changed, but because the context would have changed, the social proof that came with visible authority. And now those same founders were celebrating their funding, probably telling themselves and their investors the story of their successful raise, a narrative that would smooth over any awkward moments and focus on the outcome. Marcus would be a footnote at best if he appeared in the story at all. Friday afternoon, Marcus had a call scheduled with one of his most successful portfolio companies, a SaaS platform called Streamline that had grown from $2 million in revenue when Apex invested to $40 million now, on track for an acquisition in the next 12 months. The founder, a white man named Josh Parker, wanted to discuss board composition for the post-acquisition entity. It was the kind of call Marcus enjoyed, strategic and forward-looking, the reward for having made a good investment 5 years earlier. 20 minutes into the conversation, Josh said something that made Marcus pause. "By the way, I met your friend Kevin Strand last week at a conference. He mentioned you were at his Series A pitch. Small world." Marcus kept his voice neutral. "Oh yeah. How do you know Kevin? We both spoke on a panel about enterprise sales. Good guy. Super smart. He said you gave them some tough feedback on their financials." "I asked a few questions," Marcus said. "That's the job." Josh laughed. "Well, he said something funny. He mentioned that you were at the pitch with Palladian, but he wasn't sure what your role was. I told him you run Apex and he looked kind of shocked. I think he had no idea." There it was, the confirmation of what Marcus had already known. Kevin had walked out of that conference room with no clear sense of who Marcus was, what he represented, what he controlled. Even after receiving Marcus's email, even after Marcus had signed his name with his title and firm, Kevin hadn't fully registered it. The information had been available, but somehow it hadn't stuck, hadn't reorganized Kevin's memory of the interaction. "That's funny," Marcus said, keeping his tone light. "Right," Josh continued, oblivious to the weight of what he'd just shared. "Anyway, I set him straight, told him you're one of the best investors in the business. I think he felt bad, like he'd missed an opportunity." "It's fine," Marcus said. "We passed on the deal anyway, not the right fit for Apex." They moved back to discussing Streamline's acquisition timeline. After the call ended, Marcus sat in his office, watching the light fade outside his window. He felt exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. It was the exhaustion of constantly managing other people's perceptions, of having to prove himself in rooms where others were granted automatic credibility, of carrying the knowledge that even extraordinary success didn't fully insulate you from the baseline assumptions people made about who you were and what you were capable of. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer Okafor, his partner. "Drinks tonight? I'm buying." Marcus typed back, "Where?" "That place on 47th you like, 6:30. See you there." He arrived at the bar at 6:25, a quiet, upscale spot where the bartenders knew his order. Jennifer was already there, sitting at a table in the back, 2 glasses of wine in front of her. She was in her mid-40s, brilliant and relentless, one of the best investors Marcus knew. She'd been his third partner hire at Apex, and she'd proven invaluable both for her judgment and her willingness to push back when she thought he was wrong. "Rough week?" she asked as he sat down. "Isn't it always?" Marcus took a sip of wine. Good Pinot Noir, rich and smooth. Jennifer studied him. "You've been off since you got back from San Francisco. What happened?" He almost deflected, almost gave her the standard answer about being tired, about deal flow being intense. But Jennifer was one of the few people who would understand without him having to explain every detail. So he told her about the next Tensor pitch, about walking into the room and being treated like an afterthought, about Kevin and Jennifer and Brad looking past him for the entire hour, about Annie's apologetic call and Michael's email, and Josh Parker's casual revelation that Kevin still didn't fully grasp who Marcus was. Jennifer listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "That's exhausting." "Yeah. And infuriating." "Yeah. But not surprising." "No," Marcus agreed. "Not surprising." Jennifer took a long sip of her wine. "You know what the worst part is? They probably think they're good people. Kevin and Jennifer and Brad, they'd be horrified if you told them they were biased. They'd point to their company's diversity statistics or their stated commitment to inclusion or whatever. But when you were sitting there in that room, they couldn't see you." "Exactly," Marcus said. "It wasn't hostile, it was just absent, like I didn't register as someone who mattered. And now they've raised their round, and they're celebrating, and they have no idea what they missed," Jennifer said. She leaned back, shaking her head. "I deal with versions of this all the time. Not the same as you, different flavor, but the same core thing. Being a woman in this business, especially a black woman, you're constantly fighting to be heard in rooms full of men who think they're enlightened because they hired one female associate." They sat with that for a moment, the shared recognition of the work it took to navigate these spaces. Then Jennifer said, "So what are you going to do?" "About what?" "About next Tensor. About Kevin thinking he missed an opportunity with Apex." Marcus shrugged. "Nothing. We passed on the deal. They got their funding. It's done." "Is it?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" Jennifer set her glass down, leaning forward. "Marcus, you have leverage here. You're Marcus Reed. You run a $2 billion fund. You have relationships across the entire ecosystem. If you wanted to, you could make sure everyone knows what happened in that room. To what end? Marcus asked. Destroy a startup because their founders didn't recognize me? That's not who I am. I'm not saying destroy them, Jennifer said. I'm saying there's a teachable moment here. For them, for Meridian, for Palladian, for everyone who thinks they're doing everything right but still perpetuates the same dynamics. Marcus considered this. The idea had appeal, the fantasy of making visible what usually stayed invisible, but he knew how it would play out. Kevin and his co-founders would apologize, probably sincerely. They'd talk about learning and growing and doing better. Meridian and Palladian would nod along, maybe add some diversity training to their processes, and then everyone would move on, and the next time a black investor sat in a room with founders who didn't recognize him, the same thing would happen. I'm tired, Jennifer, he said. I'm tired of being the teaching moment. I'm tired of having to turn every interaction into an object lesson about bias. I just want to do my job. I know, Jennifer said. I get that. But you also have a responsibility. To younger investors coming up behind you. To founders of color who are building companies and getting overlooked. To everyone who needs to see that these patterns have consequences. So I should make an example of Nextensa. I'm saying you should consider it, Jennifer said. Not as revenge, as accountability. They finished their drinks and talked about other things, lighter topics, portfolio company updates and industry gossip. But Jennifer's words stayed with Marcus as he walked home through the cold night, the city's lights blurring in his peripheral vision. He thought about accountability, about consequences, about the difference between private grievance and public lesson. By the time he reached his apartment, he'd made a decision. He wasn't going to mount a campaign against Nextensa or Kevin Strand. That wasn't his style, and it wouldn't accomplish what Jennifer hoped. But he also wasn't going to let it pass entirely without marking it, without making sure that at least a few people in the ecosystem understood what had happened. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, pulled up his email and started a new message. The recipient list was small, targeted. Michael Brennan at Palladian, Christina Walsh at Meridian, and 3 other senior investors he knew well, people whose opinions shaped the industry. Subject line, a reflection on pitch dynamics. He wrote carefully, avoiding accusatory language but making the facts clear. He described the Nextensa pitch, the confusion about his attendance, the way the founders had directed their attention exclusively to Raj while Marcus sat across from them. He noted that this wasn't about the investment decision itself, Apex had passed on the merits, but about the dynamics in the room and what they revealed about assumptions and automatic credibility. He ended with a paragraph about the broader implications. How these patterns kept capital from flowing to diverse founders, how they limited the pool of investors who got heard and respected, how the ecosystem remained homogeneous, not because of explicit exclusion, but because of 1,000 small moments where people like him became invisible. He read it 3 times, adjusting phrases, making sure the tone stayed measured and reflective rather than angry. Then he hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came quickly. Michael Brennan replied within an hour. Marcus, thanks for sharing this. You're absolutely right, and I'm embarrassed we didn't handle it better. Can we set up a call to discuss? I want to make sure we're addressing this systemically at Palladian, not just apologizing to you. Christina Walsh's response arrived the next morning. Marcus, I appreciate you taking the time to write this. I wasn't aware of the dynamic at the pitch, but I'm glad you're raising it. Let's talk about how Meridian can do better. The other 3 investors sent similar messages, a mix of gratitude and discomfort, and promises to reflect. Marcus read the responses, feeling a complicated mix of satisfaction and skepticism. The words were right. Whether they'd lead to meaningful change was another question, but at least he'd marked the moment, made it legible to people who might not have seen it otherwise. Monday morning his phone rang. Christina Walsh calling from Meridian's offices in Palo Alto. Marcus answered, curious. Christina. Marcus, thanks for taking my call. Christina's voice was direct, warm but professional. I wanted to follow up on your email. I've been thinking about it all weekend. Okay. First, I want to say I'm sorry, not in a pro forma way, but genuinely. I didn't know what happened at that Palladian pitch, and I probably should have asked more questions when Kevin described the process to me. It's not your fault, Marcus said. You weren't in the room. No, but I'm their lead investor now, which means I have some responsibility for how they operate. Christina paused. I'd like to use this as a case study with our portfolio. With your permission, I want to share the broad strokes of what happened, obviously anonymized, as part of our founder training around unconscious bias and how it shows up in fundraising contexts. Marcus felt a flicker of surprise. That's more than I expected. It's the least I can do, Christina said. This stuff matters, Marcus. I'm a white woman in this business, which comes with its own set of challenges, but I have more automatic credibility than you do in a lot of rooms, and that's fucked up. If I can use my position to make it clear to our founders that they need to check their assumptions, I should. They talked for 20 more minutes, working through what the training might look like, how to frame it without singling out Nextensor in a way that would be destructive. Christina promised to send him a draft of the case study before using it. By the end of the call, Marcus felt cautiously hopeful that something useful might come from the experience. The following week unfolded with the usual rhythm. Marcus met with portfolio companies, reviewed new deals, managed the operational demands of running Apex, but he noticed a shift in how certain conversations went. Michael Brennan called to discuss implementing better coordination protocols at Palladian for when outside investors attended pitches. Another VC he knew, someone who'd been copied on the email, reached out to ask if Marcus would be willing to speak on a panel about diversity in venture capital. Josh Parker, the Streamline founder, sent a note saying he'd talked to Kevin Strand again, and Kevin wanted to apologize directly. Marcus agreed to the panel, but declined Kevin's offer to connect. There was no point in making Kevin feel worse about something he likely still didn't fully understand. The goal wasn't individual penance, it was systemic awareness. And that took time, repetition, the slow accumulation of moments where people had to confront their own blindness. In early November, Marcus received an unexpected package at the Apex offices. Inside was a hardcover book, a collection of essays about venture capital and entrepreneurship. A handwritten note was tucked inside the front cover. Marcus, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our conversation. This book helped me understand some of what you were describing. I hope we can talk more about how to make this industry more inclusive. With respect, Christina. Marcus paged through the book. It was thoughtful, well-researched, full of data and stories about how bias operated in startup ecosystems. He appreciated the gesture. He also recognized it for what it was, a beginning, not a solution. Christina was trying genuinely, and that mattered, but one person trying wasn't enough to shift an entire industry. He sent Christina a thank you email, brief but sincere. Then he set the book on his shelf next to the annual reports and the other artifacts of his career. Thanksgiving came and went. Jasmine came home from Yale, brilliant and exhausted, full of stories about her classes and her friends and the projects she was working on. They had dinner together on Thursday, just the two of them. Turkey and all the sides Marcus had spent the day preparing. Over dessert, Jasmine asked about work. It's good, Marcus said. Busy. The portfolio is performing well. You sound tired, Dad. I am tired, but it's a good tired mostly. Jasmine studied him across the table. Did something happen recently? You seem different, more I don't know, reflective. Marcus considered how much to tell her. He'd been protecting her from these stories her whole life, wanting her to grow up confident and unburdened by the weight of other people's biases. But she was 20 now, navigating her own versions of these dynamics. Maybe the protection was less useful than the honesty. So he told her about Nextensor, about the pitch and the dismissal and the aftermath, about Jennifer Okafor's challenge to make it public and his decision to write the email, about Christina's response and the possibility that something systemic might shift, even if just slightly. Jasmine listened intently, her expression hardening as he described the conference room dynamics, softening when he talked about Christina's commitment to change. When he finished, she said, I'm glad you said something. Even if it doesn't fix everything, it matters that you named it. You think so? Yeah, because otherwise everyone just moves on, pretending it didn't happen or that it wasn't a big deal. And then it keeps happening. She pushed her dessert plate away, leaning back in her chair. I've been thinking about this a lot, Dad, about the work it takes to exist in spaces that weren't designed for you, and I keep coming back to the idea that part of our responsibility is to make it harder for people to stay ignorant. Not in a mean way, but just refusing to let them off the hook. Marcus felt a surge of pride, painful and fierce. His daughter was becoming the person he'd hoped she'd become, thoughtful, principled, unwilling to accept the status quo just because it was familiar. "That's wise," he said. "I learned from you," Jasmine said. "Even when you were trying to protect me from this stuff, I watched how you moved through the world. I saw the work you put in, the way you had to be twice as good to get half as far. I know the phrase is a cliché, but it's true." "It is," Marcus agreed. "But you also learn to find the victories where you can. The companies that succeed, the founders who grow, the moments when you know you made the right call even if no one else saw it clearly at the time. They cleaned up together, washing dishes while the city darkened outside the windows." Later, after Jasmine had gone to bed, Marcus sat in his living room with a glass of whiskey, thinking about what she'd said, about the work of making it harder for people to stay ignorant, about refusing to let them off the hook. December brought the end-of-year rush, the push to close deals before the holiday slowdown, the preparation for annual LP meetings and performance reviews. Apex's portfolio had a strong year. 4 companies hit major milestones, 2 were preparing for IPOs, and the fund's overall returns were tracking above target. Marcus spent hours crafting the year-end report, making sure the narrative captured both the successes and the lessons learned. In the middle of the month, he got an email from Kevin Strand. Subject line, "Checking in." Marcus opened it with curiosity and a touch of wariness. "Hi, Marcus. I hope this email finds you well. I know you declined my earlier offer to connect, and I respect that. But I wanted to reach out one more time, not to apologize again, though I am sorry for how our pitch went, but to let you know that Christina Walsh shared your story with our cohort of Meridian portfolio companies. She didn't name you or Nextensa specifically, but she made it clear that the dynamics you described are real and common and unacceptable. It hit me hard. I've been thinking about all the ways I probably miss these dynamics in my own life, both as a founder and as a person. I don't expect you to respond to this. I just wanted you to know that your decision to speak up mattered. It changed how I see things. With gratitude, Kevin." Marcus read the email twice. It was honest, reflective, lacking the defensive quality that often accompanied these conversations. He thought about replying, then decided to let it sit. Kevin didn't need his absolution or his validation. What Kevin needed was to continue doing the work of examining his own assumptions, and that was something Marcus couldn't facilitate for him. But he forwarded the email to Jennifer Okafor with a short note. "Maybe there's hope after all." Jennifer wrote back, "One person at a time. Keep pushing." Christmas approached. Marcus spent the holiday with Jasmine in New York, the two of them navigating the strange compressed intimacy of parent and adult child, finding a new rhythm now that she was becoming her own person. They went to museums, saw a show, cooked elaborate meals. On Christmas morning, over coffee and pastries, Jasmine handed him a wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo he'd never seen before. It showed a younger Marcus, maybe 40 years old, standing with the founders of one of his earliest successful investments. The company had gone public years ago, a major win that had established Apex's reputation. In the photo, Marcus was laughing at something one of the founders had said, his expression open and joyful. "Where did you get this?" Marcus asked. "I reached out to Sarah and asked if she could find any photos from your early days," Jasmine said. "I wanted you to remember what it looked like when you started, before everything got so complicated." Marcus stared at the photo, feeling something shift in his chest. The man in the picture looked hopeful, energized, unburdened by the accumulated weight of 1,000 small dismissals and frustrations. He looked like someone who believed the work itself would be enough. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "You've built something incredible, Dad," Jasmine said. "I want you to remember that. Not just the hard parts, but the parts where you won." He set the frame on his desk when he returned to work in January, placing it where he could see it when he looked up from his laptop. The photo became a small anchor, a reminder of what mattered when the daily friction threatened to overwhelm. The new year brought new deals, new challenges, new portfolio companies needing guidance and capital. Marcus found himself thinking less about the Nextensa pitch as the weeks passed, the immediate sting fading into something more distant. But the broader awareness stayed with him, the recognition that the work of navigating these spaces would never end, that each conference room and pitch meeting held the potential for the same dynamics to reassert themselves. In February, Marcus was invited to speak at a venture capital conference in Austin. The panel topic, diversifying the investor landscape. He almost declined, tired of being asked to explain and justify and educate, but Jennifer convinced him to accept. "You have a platform," she said. "Use it." The panel was scheduled for the second day of the conference. Marcus flew to Austin the night before, checked into his hotel, and spent the evening reviewing his notes. The next morning, he arrived at the convention center, a massive glass and steel structure crawling with investors and founders and entrepreneurs. The energy was intense, deal-making and networking compressed into a 3-day window. He found the room where the panel would take place, a mid-sized space with rows of chairs and a stage up front. The other panelists were already there, 2 white women investors, 1 Latino man and the moderator, a black woman named Simone Cross, who ran a venture fund focused on underrepresented founders. Marcus knew Simone slightly, had sat on a panel with her once before. She was smart and direct, unwilling to let people off easy. The panel began with introductions, each investor describing their background and their fund's focus. Then Simone jumped straight in. "Let's talk about why this panel exists. Why in 2026 are we still having conversations about diversity in venture capital? Why hasn't the data moved more significantly?" One of the white women investors, a partner at a respected mid-stage fund, answered first. "I think there's been real progress. More funds led by women and people of color, more capital flowing to diverse founders. But it's slow because venture is relationship-driven, and those relationships take time to build." "That's true," Simone said, "but it's also convenient. It lets the industry off the hook for actively perpetuating homogeneity." She turned to Marcus. "You've been doing this for over 20 years, Marcus. What's your take?" Marcus leaned forward, gathering his thoughts. "I think the slowness is a feature, not a bug. The people who currently hold power in venture capital have very little incentive to change the system, because the system works for them. Yes, there are exceptions, people who genuinely want to diversify the ecosystem. But structurally, the industry rewards pattern matching and playing it safe, which means investing in founders who look and sound like previous winners. Breaking that pattern requires risk, and risk is expensive." The audience stirred. Someone in the third row raised a hand, but Simone waved them off. "Hold questions for the end." "Marcus, you're saying it's intentional." "I'm saying it's overdetermined," Marcus corrected. "Not a conspiracy, but 1,000 small decisions that add up to the status quo. Who gets funded, who gets board seats, who gets invited to the right dinners and conferences, whose emails get returned. All of that is shaped by conscious and unconscious bias, and the people benefiting from those patterns don't have a clear reason to change them." The Latino investor, a younger man named Carlos Rivera, spoke up. "But we're seeing more data showing that diverse founding teams outperform, that funds with diverse partners generate better returns. Doesn't that create an economic incentive to change?" "You'd think," Marcus said, "but the lag between investment and outcome in venture capital is long, 5 to 10 years, which means the people making decisions today won't see the full impact of those decisions until much later, and by then they've already moved on to the next fund. Short-term incentives don't align with long-term optimization." Simone turned to the audience. "Questions?" Hands shot up across the room. The next 30 minutes became a sprawling conversation about pipeline problems and pattern recognition and how to actually move the needle. Marcus found himself describing the next tensor pitch, without naming names, as an example of how bias operated in real time. He talked about walking into the room and being rendered invisible, about the way credibility got allocated based on assumptions rather than evidence. A young woman in the front row, South Asian, raised her hand. "What did you do?" "After that pitch," Marcus paused, "I wrote an email to a few senior investors describing what had happened, and I asked them to think about how these dynamics show up in their own processes." "Did it change anything?" the woman asked. "A little," Marcus said. "One of the investors used it as a case study with their portfolio companies. Another firm updated their coordination protocols for when outside investors attend pitches. Small shifts, not revolutionary, but something." "And you're okay with that?" the woman pressed. "With small shifts." Marcus met her eyes, seeing the frustration and hope mixed there, the hunger for someone to tell her that the work would get easier, or that the system would break in a decisive way. He wanted to give her that reassurance. Instead, he gave her the truth. "I'm okay with incremental progress because it's the only kind of progress we're likely to get in the short term. Revolutionary change is rare and usually requires a crisis. What we can do is keep marking the moments, keep making the invisible visible, keep refusing to accept the story that the industry tells itself about meritocracy and objectivity. That's exhausting work. It doesn't always feel like enough, but it's the work we have." The room fell quiet. Simone let the silence sit for a beat, then moved to the next question. The panel continued for another 20 minutes, covering topics from fund structure to LP diversity to the role of regulation. By the time it ended, Marcus felt wrung out, the emotional labor of the conversation catching up with him. Afterward, a small cluster of people approached him. Some wanted to exchange cards, to talk about potential partnerships or investment opportunities. Others just wanted to say thank you, to tell him his comments had resonated. The young South Asian woman from the front row waited until the crowd thinned, then stepped forward. "I'm Priya Mehta," she said. "I just raised my first fund, $3 million, focused on pre-seed companies led by immigrants and first-generation founders." "Congratulations," Marcus said. "That's not an easy thing to do." "It was brutal," Priya said, smiling slightly. "I talked to over 200 LPs. Most of them said no without even looking at my track record." She paused. "I wanted to ask, do you have advice for someone like me? Someone just starting out trying to build credibility in a world that doesn't automatically grant it." Marcus thought about his own early years, the pitches he'd made to raise Apex's first fund, the skepticism he'd encountered. He thought about Kevin Strand looking past him in that conference room, about Annie Chen asking if he was with Nextensa. He thought about the accumulated weight of proving himself over and over again. "Focus on the work," he said. "Make great investments, support your founders, generate returns. That's the foundation. Everything else, the visibility and the credibility and the access, builds on that. But also, find your community. Other investors who get it, who see you clearly. Partner with them, learn from them, support them, because this work is too hard to do alone." "That's good advice," Priya said. She hesitated, then added, "Would you be willing to get coffee sometime? I'd love to learn more about how you built Apex." Marcus pulled out his card, handed it to her. "Email me. We'll set something up." She thanked him and walked away. Marcus gathered his things, ready to leave, but Simone caught him before he reached the door. "That was good," she said. "Honest. I appreciate you not sugarcoating it." "I'm tired of sugarcoating it," Marcus said. "It doesn't help anyone." "Agreed." Simone crossed her arms, studying him. "You know, there's a group of investors, mostly folks of color, who've been talking about creating a more formal network, share deal flow, coordinate on follow-on rounds, amplify each other's funds when we're raising. You interested?" Marcus considered. He'd been part of informal networks before, ad hoc groups that met occasionally, but never coalesced into anything structural. The idea of something more deliberate appealed. "Tell me more." They talked for 15 minutes, standing in the emptying conference room. Simone laid out the vision. A network of 20 to 30 investors, funds ranging from 5 million to 2 billion in AUM, all committed to diversifying capital allocation and supporting each other's growth. Regular meetings, shared due diligence, coordinated advocacy for policy changes that would open up access to institutional LP capital for emerging managers. "I'm in," Marcus said. "Let me know what you need from me." "I'll send details next week," Simone promised. She shook his hand, her grip firm. "Thanks for showing up, Marcus. People need to see that it's possible to succeed in this world without compromising who you are." Marcus flew back to New York that evening, Simone's words echoing in his mind. He'd spent 23 years building Apex, proving that a black man could run a successful venture fund, that the supposed obstacles were surmountable with enough talent and persistence and luck. But he'd also learned that individual success wasn't enough, that the system absorbed anomalies without fundamentally changing. Maybe the network Simone was building would be different. Maybe collective action would generate the pressure that individual excellence couldn't. Or maybe it would be another well-intentioned effort that got diluted by the realities of competition and self-interest. Either way, it was worth trying. Back at his desk on Monday, Marcus found an email from Christina Walsh. Subject line, Nextensa update. He opened it, curious. "Marcus, wanted to give you a heads up. Nextensa is raising their Series B, 6 months ahead of schedule. They've hit some major milestones, signed 2 Tier 1 banking clients, expanded the team. I'm leading the round again. I know Apex passed last year, but wanted to offer you the opportunity to participate in this round if your evaluation has changed. The company has matured significantly. Let me know if you want to see the updated deck. Best, Christina. Marcus read the email twice. Nextensa was succeeding, growing faster than their initial projections suggested. That was good for Christina, good for Kevin and Jennifer and Brad, good for the enterprise software ecosystem. It also meant Marcus had been wrong, or at least too conservative in his assessment. The retention modeling he'd questioned was proving out. The Tier 1 pilots he'd noted were absent had materialized. He pulled up his notes from the original pitch, reading through his assessment. The concerns he'd raised were legitimate, based on the data available at the time. But data changed. Companies evolved. Founders who seemed unready sometimes grew into their roles. He wrote back to Christina, "Congratulations on the momentum. I'm happy to see the updated deck, but I expect Apex will pass again. Our current portfolio is overweight in infrastructure software, and we're focusing on fintech and AI-driven applications. Wish you and the team continued success." He hit send, then sat back. There was no regret in the decision. Nextensa might go on to be a billion-dollar company, or it might plateau and get acquired for a moderate return. Either way, it wasn't Apex's deal. Sometimes the deals you passed on succeeded without you. What stayed with him, though, was the question of how the original pitch might have gone differently. If he'd been introduced properly, if Raj had known he was coming, if the founders had understood his track record from the beginning, would they have answered his questions more thoughtfully? Would they have followed up more persistently? Would Marcus have seen something in their responses that changed his evaluation? There was no way to know. The multiverse of possible outcomes remained theoretical. All he had was the actual history, the sequence of events that had unfolded. Spring arrived in New York, the city thawing from winter's grip. Marcus found himself busier than ever, the pace of deal flow accelerating as the market heated up. Apex closed 2 new investments, both in AI applications, both with founding teams that included women and people of color. The portfolio companies continued to perform well. SecureNet, the cybersecurity firm that had struggled through the fall, stabilized under new leadership. Equitable Finance, Keisha Thomas's fintech platform, crossed $2 billion in annual transaction volume. In April, Marcus got a call from Josh Parker at Streamline. "The acquisition closed," Josh said, excitement clear in his voice. "Final valuation came in at $90 million. Your position returns 8.5x. Marcus felt satisfaction bloom in his chest. Streamline had been one of Apex's earliest investments, a company he'd believed in when it was just 2 people and a slide deck. "Congratulations, Josh. You earned this." "Couldn't have done it without you," Josh said. "Seriously, Marcus. The guidance, the board support, the network you opened up, that's what made the difference." They talked through the logistics, the timeline for distributing proceeds to LPs, the next steps for Josh's career. After the call, Marcus sat with the win, letting himself feel the uncomplicated joy of a successful outcome. These moments were rare enough to savor. He called his partners, sharing the news. They celebrated together over lunch, toasting with expensive wine and talking about what the Streamline exit meant for Apex's overall returns. The fund was performing in the top quartile, maybe top decile. The next fundraise, planned for later that year, would be easier because of results like this. "We should do something special," Jennifer Okafor said. "Take the team out, celebrate properly." "Agreed," David Zhang said. "We've been grinding hard. People deserve to mark the win." They planned a dinner for the following week, reserving a private room at a restaurant downtown. The entire Apex team attended, 20 people sharing food and stories, and the particular camaraderie that came from shared success. Marcus gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their work, emphasizing that wins like Streamline were team efforts. He looked around the table, seeing the diversity of the group, people from different backgrounds and identities, and felt proud of what they'd built together. Later, after most of the team had left, he sat with his 3 partners at the table, the remains of dinner scattered around them. Tom Steinberg raised his glass. To Apex, and to Marcus, for having the vision to build this thing. They clinked glasses. Marcus felt the whiskey burn going down, warm and grounding. "I couldn't have done it without you 3. You know that." "We know," Jennifer said, "but you're the one who made it possible, who took the risk, who put your reputation on the line, who dealt with all the bullshit so the rest of us could focus on the work. Marcus shook his head. We all dealt with the bullshit, that's the job. True, David said, but you dealt with a specific kind of bullshit that the rest of us don't have to navigate the same way. He met Marcus's eyes. I see it, man. The way rooms respond to you differently. The way you have to prove yourself in situations where Tom or I get automatic credibility. It's fucked up. And I'm sorry for the times I didn't acknowledge it or support you the way I should have. The vulnerability in David's voice caught Marcus off guard. They'd worked together for years, been through countless pitches and negotiations and board meetings, but this felt different, more personal, more honest. I appreciate that, Marcus said. Really. Tom and Jennifer echoed David's sentiments, each of them acknowledging the dynamics they'd observed, the moments when Marcus had been dismissed or overlooked, or had to work twice as hard to get half as far. It wasn't a comfortable conversation, but it was necessary. The kind of honest reckoning that strengthened rather than weakened their partnership. By the time they left the restaurant close to midnight, Marcus felt something shift in his relationship with his partners. The acknowledgement of the different terrains they navigated didn't erase those differences, but it made them visible, created space for the complexity of their shared work. Walking home through the quiet streets, Marcus thought about the trajectory of his career, the early struggles to raise capital, the skepticism he'd faced, the gradual accumulation of wins that had built Apex into what it was now. The path hadn't been linear or easy, but it had been his, shaped by his choices and his persistence, and his refusal to accept the limitations other people tried to place on him. He thought about Kevin Strand and Next Tensor, about the conference room at Palladian, and the moment when his invisibility had crystallized. That moment had been painful, frustrating, exhausting, but it had also catalyzed something, forced him to articulate dynamics he usually left unspoken, led to Christina's case study and Simone's network and a dozen small shifts across the ecosystem. Maybe that was the work. Not revolutionizing the entire industry overnight, but creating enough friction, enough visibility, enough accountability that the next black investor walking into a conference room would have a slightly easier time. That Priya Mehta, raising her first fund, would find doors that opened more readily. That Jasmine, building whatever career she chose, would navigate spaces that had been shaped by the struggles of the generation before her. In May, the network Simone Cross had proposed officially launched. 28 investors, representing $14 billion in aggregate assets under management, committed to coordinating deal flow and supporting each other's fundraising efforts. They held their first meeting in Chicago, a day-long gathering that felt equal parts strategic planning and community building. Marcus presented Apex's portfolio, highlighting 3 companies that were raising follow-on rounds and might benefit from investment by other network members. Simone facilitated discussions about coordinating on policy advocacy, about how to pressure large institutional LPs to allocate more capital to emerging managers. Another investor, a black woman named Aisha Benson, who ran a growth equity fund in Atlanta, led a session on media strategy and how to raise the profile of diverse investors. The day was exhausting, but energizing. Marcus left feeling connected to something larger than Apex, part of a collective effort that might actually move the needle. The network wasn't perfect. It had tensions and disagreements, and the inevitable personality clashes that came with any group. But it existed, and that was something. Summer brought a slowdown in deal flow, the usual seasonal pattern. Marcus used the time to focus on portfolio management, working closely with founders who needed strategic guidance or introductions or capital for bridge rounds. He also started writing, experimenting with a newsletter that examined venture capital dynamics through the lens of his own experiences. The first few editions were tentative, carefully worded, but as he found his voice, the writing became sharper, more direct. The newsletter gained subscribers slowly at first, then faster as people shared it within the industry. Marcus wrote about bias in pitch meetings, about the hidden barriers diverse founders faced, about the ways capital allocation perpetuated inequality. He shared stories without naming names, protecting the privacy of the people involved while making the patterns visible. In July, he published an essay about the Next Tensor pitch, still keeping the company and individuals anonymous, but describing the dynamics in detail. The response was intense. Hundreds of comments, Dozens of emails, people sharing their own versions of the story. Some readers pushed back, arguing that he was being oversensitive or reading too much into normal business interactions. But more people recognized the pattern, validated the experience, thanked him for articulating something they'd felt but struggled to name. Christina Walsh emailed him after that essay. "I shared this with our entire team at Meridian. Required reading for everyone, partners to analysts. Thank you for writing it." Michael Brennan sent a shorter note. "This hurts to read, knowing I was part of the dynamic. I'm working on being better." Even Kevin Strand reached out, writing, "I don't know if you'll want to hear from me, but reading this forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. I'm grateful you wrote it." Marcus didn't respond to all the messages. Some he acknowledged briefly. Others he let sit, preferring to let the writing speak for itself. The point wasn't to extract apologies or validate his experience through other people's reactions. The point was to document the reality, to create a record that couldn't be dismissed or forgotten. August brought another milestone. Apex announced that it was raising its fourth fund, targeting $500 million in commitments. The fundraising process would take 6 months, requiring dozens of meetings with institutional LPs, family offices, high-net-worth individuals. Marcus dreaded the process, the endless presentations and questions and due diligence requests. But it was necessary, the fuel that kept Apex running. The first pitch meeting was with a university endowment, a major LP that had been considering an allocation to Apex since the previous fund. Marcus and Jennifer presented together, walking through the portfolio performance, the investment strategy, the team's expertise. The endowment's CIO, a white man in his early 60s, asked pointed questions about returns and risk management. An hour into the meeting, he said, "You've built an impressive track record, Marcus, but I have to ask how much of your success is attributable to your team versus your own judgment." The question landed badly. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but he felt Jennifer stiffen beside him. "I'd say it's collaborative," Marcus said carefully. "I lead the fund and make final investment decisions, but my partners bring expertise and perspectives that make us stronger as a group." Of course, the CIO said. "I'm just trying to understand key person risk. If something happened to you, would the fund's performance suffer?" Jennifer spoke up, her tone sharp. "The same question could be asked of any fund. Marcus has built a strong team and a repeatable investment process, but yes, he's the driving force the same way any founding partner is." The CIO nodded, moving on to other topics. But the question stayed with Marcus for the rest of the meeting, the implicit skepticism underneath it. Would the CIO have asked that same question if Marcus were white? Or would he have automatically assumed that a successful track record reflected the leader's competence? There was no way to know. All Marcus could do was answer the questions professionally and let the results speak for themselves. If you've been moved by this story, by the truth of what it reveals, make sure others see it too. The fundraising process ground on through the fall. Most meetings went well, LPs impressed by Apex's performance and the quality of the portfolio. But there were uncomfortable moments, subtle and overt, where Marcus felt the familiar weight of having to prove himself beyond what the numbers alone should require. An LP asked if Apex had considered diversifying its investment strategy, a coded way of suggesting that the fund's focus on diverse founders might be limiting returns. Another LP, a wealthy individual, commented that Marcus was very articulate, a compliment that carried undertones Marcus had learned to recognize decades ago. He navigated each moment with the skill he'd developed over a career, deflecting or addressing, or sometimes just letting the comment sit unchallenged. Jennifer and David, who attended many of the meetings, started calling out the dynamics more directly, supporting Marcus in ways that felt both helpful and complicated. He appreciated their allyship. He also recognized that the burden of addressing bias shouldn't fall entirely on him, that sharing the work was itself a form of progress. By late November, Apex had secured $400 million in commitments, with another 2 months of fundraising left. It was slower than Marcus had hoped, but strong enough to hit the target. The market for emerging managers was tough, institutional LPs consolidating their portfolios, favoring established funds with longer track records. That Apex was succeeding at all in this environment spoke to the strength of their performance. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, Marcus had a call scheduled with an LP he'd been pursuing for months, a large pension fund based in California. The fund's CIO, a woman named Laura Martin, had been intrigued by Apex's strategy, but cautious about committing. This call was meant to be a final push, a chance to address any remaining concerns. 5 minutes before the call, Marcus's assistant knocked on his door. "You have a visitor. Kevin Strand from Nextensor. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Kevin Strand is here? In New York?" "Downstairs in the lobby. He flew in this morning and wanted to see if you had a few minutes." Marcus considered. He had 4 minutes before the LP call, no time for a meaningful conversation. But curiosity won out. "Tell him I have a call in 3 minutes, but I can see him after, if he can wait 30 minutes. Sarah nodded, relayed the message. Marcus prepared for his call with Laura Martin, but part of his attention stayed on the question of why Kevin had shown up unannounced, why he'd flown across the country without scheduling a meeting. The call with Laura went well, better than Marcus expected. She asked about the fundraising progress, about the portfolio, about Apex's plans for the next 5 years. By the end, she'd committed to a $20 million investment, pending final due diligence. Marcus thanked her, ended the call and sat back, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. $420 million now, with 8 weeks left to raise the final 80. He called down to the lobby. "Send Kevin up." 3 minutes later, Kevin Strand walked into Marcus's office. He looked older than Marcus remembered from the pitch 13 months earlier, a little more worn. His handshake was firm, his expression serious. "Marcus, thank you for seeing me without notice. I know that's not ideal." "It's fine," Marcus said. "What brings you to New York?" Kevin sat in the chair across from Marcus's desk. "A few things. We're closing our Series B this week, which is good news. Christina has been an amazing partner. The company is growing fast. We're up to 40 employees now, 3 million in ARR, on track for 12 million next year." "That's impressive," Marcus said, and meant it. "Thanks." Kevin paused, gathering himself. "But I didn't come here to brag about our metrics. I came because I owe you a real apology, face to face, not through an email." Marcus leaned back in his chair, waiting. Kevin continued, his voice steady but strained. "I've spent the last year thinking about our pitch at Palladian, about the way I treated you. And I need to say without qualification that I was wrong. I didn't see you, Marcus. I looked right past you because I made assumptions based on your appearance, on my own narrow definition of who an investor looks like. And that's shameful. There's no excuse for it." Marcus listened without interrupting. He could see the effort it had taken for Kevin to come here, to say these words in person, rather than hiding behind digital communication. That took courage. Even if it was courage Kevin should have found a year earlier. "I also want you to know that Christina's case study, the one she did with Meridian's portfolio companies, it wrecked me," Kevin said. "She didn't name Nextensor, but I knew she was talking about us, about me, and I realized how much I'd missed, how much my own blindness had cost us. Not just in terms of potentially having Apex as an investor, though that stings, but in terms of becoming the kind of leader I want to be, the kind of founder who builds an inclusive company and treats everyone with respect." "What have you changed?" Marcus asked. The question wasn't hostile, just direct. Kevin met his eyes. "We hired a head of diversity and inclusion, someone who reports directly to me and has budget and authority to reshape our culture. We've overhauled our hiring process to reduce bias. We've built relationships with organizations that support underrepresented founders and engineers. And personally, I've done a lot of reading, a lot of training, a lot of uncomfortable conversations with people who've experienced what you experienced." "That's good," Marcus said. He meant it, but he also recognized the limits of individual reform. Kevin could become the most enlightened founder in Silicon Valley, and it wouldn't fix the broader ecosystem. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Kevin said. "I don't expect us to be friends or partners or anything. I just needed to say this to your face, to take responsibility for how I showed up in that room. You deserved better." Marcus sat with the apology, feeling its sincerity. He thought about all the times people had dismissed him, all the moments when he'd been rendered invisible by other people's assumptions. Most of those people had never apologized, never even recognized what they'd done. Kevin was an exception, someone who'd been forced to confront his own bias and had chosen to engage rather than deflect. "I appreciate you coming here," Marcus said finally. "I appreciate the work you're doing, both with your company and with yourself. That matters." Kevin nodded, relief visible on his face. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Do you regret not investing in Nextensa, now that you see where we're headed?" Marcus considered the question honestly. "No. The decision was right based on the information I had at the time. You're succeeding, which I'm glad to see, but it's not my success to claim." "Fair enough." Kevin stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for your time, Marcus, and thank you for writing about this stuff publicly. It's uncomfortable to read, but it's necessary." They shook hands. Marcus walked Kevin to the elevator, said goodbye. After Kevin left, Marcus returned to his office and stood at the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, the afternoon light slanting between buildings. He thought about accountability, about the difference between an apology and meaningful change. Kevin's visit had been genuine, but it was also just one moment, one person trying to do better. The system that had produced that conference room dynamic, that had made Marcus invisible, remained largely intact. Still, individual moments mattered. Kevin would go back to San Francisco and run his company differently. Christina would continue using the case study, training her portfolio companies to recognize bias. Simone's network would keep coordinating, amplifying diverse voices. Marcus's newsletter would keep documenting the patterns. None of it was sufficient. All of it was necessary. December brought the final push on fundraising. Apex closed the fund at $485 million, slightly under target, but strong enough to deploy capital effectively. The team celebrated with a low-key dinner, everyone too exhausted from the process to do anything elaborate. Marcus gave a toast, thanking his partners and the associates and everyone who'd supported the raise. Later, alone in his apartment, he reflected on the year. The Nextensa pitch felt like a lifetime ago, but its reverberations had shaped the months that followed. The email he'd written, the conversations it had sparked, the newsletter he'd started, the network Simone had built, Kevin's apology, all of it connected in a web of cause and effect he couldn't have predicted. He thought about Jasmine's question from a year ago, whether it got easier once you had enough success. The answer was still no, but the work had meaning, both in the companies Apex backed and in the broader push to make the industry more inclusive. That meaning sustained him through the frustrations and the exhaustion. His phone buzzed. A text from Jasmine. "Just finished finals, coming home Friday. Can we cook dinner together?" Marcus typed back, "Absolutely. What are we making?" "Something ambitious. I'll find a recipe." He smiled, the tightness in his chest easing slightly. Whatever challenges the work held, he had people who saw him clearly, who supported him, who reminded him why the work mattered. The year ended quietly. Marcus spent the holidays with Jasmine, the two of them cooking elaborate meals and watching movies, and talking about her plans for the spring semester. On New Year's Eve, they stayed in, toasting with champagne at midnight, the city exploding with fireworks visible from Marcus's windows. "To a good year, Dad," Jasmine said, raising her glass. "To a complicated year," Marcus corrected gently. "But yeah, a good one." They clinked glasses. Outside, the city celebrated, millions of people marking the passage of time, the transition from one year to the next. Marcus stood with his daughter, watching the lights, feeling the weight and promise of the work ahead. The new year would bring new deals, new challenges, new conferences, where he'd have to navigate the same dynamics he'd been navigating for 2 decades. But it would also bring the network's second convening, and the launch of Apex's 4th fund, and the continued growth of portfolio companies he believed in. It would bring moments of victory and moments of frustration, moments when he'd want to quit, and moments when he'd remember why he started. In the morning, when the city woke to face the new year, Marcus would wake with it. He'd go to the office, pull up his laptop, review the pipeline of potential investments. He'd take calls with founders, support his portfolio companies, manage his team. He'd write another newsletter essay, documenting another pattern, making another set of invisible dynamics visible. The work was endless. The work was necessary. The work was his, shaped by his choices and his persistence and his refusal to accept the limitations other people tried to place on him. Marcus Reed would keep doing the work, because someone had to, because the next generation deserved a slightly easier path, because every conference room encounter was a chance to insist on being seen, and slowly, incrementally, through 1,000 small moments of accountability and visibility and collective action, the industry might change. It wouldn't happen overnight. It wouldn't happen completely. But it would happen because people like Marcus and Jennifer and Simone and Priya and Christina, and yes, even Kevin, refused to let it stay the same. If this narrative resonates with you, if you recognize the patterns and believe they need to be documented, shared and challenged, then pass this story forward to someone who needs to see it, because these truths spread through connection and collective witness. They refuse to let the dismissals and the invisibility and the endless small indignities become normal, become acceptable, become just the way things were. They marked each moment, named each pattern, insisted on accountability, and that insistence, repeated across enough people and enough moments, was how change happened, slowly, incrementally, but happening nonetheless.